It's been far too long since I last did a full bolt action tutorial, 10 months in fact, so let's sort this out and take a look at a kit that I've yet to cover. Early War Germans or Blitzkrieg Germans, and as per usual I'll be using the Army Painter range of paints to tackle them. Now before we get started, if you wanted to try out the techniques that I'll be demonstrating in this tutorial, Wargames Illustrated are giving away either a German Grenadier or a Blitzkrieg German sprue in their January edition for free. Plus, that edition also will be featuring a slightly updated German Grenadier tutorial written by myself, so lots of Pete the Wargamer bolt action content for you guys. Merry Christmas. So after assembling your miniature, you'll want to give it a coat of primer. This will allow all of your later layers of paint to properly adhere to the surface of the model. Without it, the paint would need to be applied quite thickly to get any decent coverage, which would likely begin to obscure details and add strange texture. But by priming, you can avoid this and also give your miniatures a single uniform colour to work from. Now I've chosen a grey airbrush primer here, as a grey really helps with the greens, browns and greys in this tutorial, basically mid-tones. However, if you prefer to use an aerosol primer or a different colour entirely, then the choice is entirely yours. After priming, we can move on to the base coat, and with all of the base coats that I'll be applying in this tutorial, I'll be thinning them down first. By thinning the paint down with just a little water, you will make the paint much easier to apply and will also allow us to use a layering technique. The first paint I'm using here is Field Grey, and this is being painted over the tunic. You can also apply this over the trousers too, but I'll be using a different grey for those personally. Apply your first thin layer and wait for this to dry. You don't need to worry about getting perfect coverage with the first application, as we can just apply a second layer over the top. By adopting this layering technique, you'll get a good, solid starting colour, which is perfect to build upon with the later washes and highlights. This is something I'll be repeating across all the base coats that I'll be applying in this tutorial. Next up, we'll be using the exact same thinning and layering techniques from before to tackle the trousers, and this time around, we'll be using some uniform grey instead to give them a slightly different shade of grey. Next, we have the gas cape pouch on the chest, the bread bag and the felt covering of the water bottle. All these items can be associated with the greyish brown of Castle Grey. When applying base coats, I like to work my way outwards, starting with the deeper parts of the model and then tackling the areas that sit over these. For example, in the first step we painted the tunic, and in this step we're adding paint to some of the equipment that is worn over the tunic. Approaching base coats in this way means you're not contorting ourselves, trying to reach hard to get areas while simultaneously avoiding getting paint on completed areas. Overall, it's much easier and is much quicker. To create a warm reddish brown wood for the rifle stock, I'll be starting things off with a base coat of fur brown. The next areas to paint are areas that would traditionally be black. Now, when painting black areas, I like to use the very dark grey of Necromancer Cloak instead. This may seem an odd choice at first glance, but the reason is twofold. Black is very rarely purely black in the real world and often appears greyish depending on how much light falls upon it. Using a dark grey helps to mimic this. Additionally, pure black doesn't allow us to benefit from a wash and having that contrast between lighter and darker parts. So, now that you're clued up on my subversive views on how to paint black, you can begin to apply your paint over the leather pouches, straps and boots of the model. You can also apply this to the metal parts of the model, including the workings of the rifle and the cup on the water bottle, to give them a blackened steel appearance. For the areas of exposed skin on the face and the hands, apply a base coat of Kobold Skin. For the dark green parts of the model, include the canteen, gas mask canisters and the helmet, we'll be using a base coat of Crypt Wraith. Now that all of our base coats are completed, we now want to begin applying our washes. Due to the thinner nature of washes, you'll find that they flow and pool into the dips and recesses of the miniature. When they dry, they remain ever so slightly translucent, which means that you are left with a darker version of your base coat in those recesses. The result is the recreation of how shadows would form on a full-scale person, and you will find that the details will stand out much more than they did before. Now, before you apply these washes, you need to thin them down. This is because applying washes straight from the bottle would be much too strong and would darken things down a little too much. However, instead of using water to thin our paint, I'll be mixing in some of the Army Painter's Quickshade mixing medium in equal parts wash to medium. The medium works by reducing the amount of pigment in the ink without changing its consistency. I find this results in a much smoother and more subtle result than if you just used water, for example. However, if you don't have access to the medium, you could use a distilled water instead. With the first wash of dark tone thinned out, apply it over all of the grey, black and green parts of the model. Using the same techniques as last time, apply a wash of strong tone over the brown parts of the model, such as the rifle stock and some of the equipment. By using a lighter, slightly softer wash colour for this step, we will retain the warmth of the brown and won't inadvertently dull down the colour too much. Finally, for the hands and the face, apply a wash of flesh wash to help bring out those facial features and to create a more realistic skin tone. After allowing your washes to completely dry, the final step in painting your German is to further increase the contrast between the lighter raised areas and the darker recessed parts of the model. Doing this will improve how detailed and realistic the model looks and can be achieved by applying highlights. Highlighting involves using a paint that is similar in colour to your base coat but is lighter in its tone. Generally, you would use a smaller brush at this stage to create a thin line along the raised edges of your model. It's useful to imagine a strong light source hitting the miniature from above and focusing your paint onto the areas that the light would touch. This will help to avoid the cartoon-like result that highlighting every edge can sometimes cause. Now the first paint that I'm using here is Castle Grey, and I'll be using this to highlight any areas that we painted with Field Grey. For the grey trousers and black leather of the webbing, pouches and boots, apply a thin edge highlight of Filthy Cape. Next, we want to pick out the folds and creases of the bread bag, water bottle and gas cape pouch using some Banshee Brown. To continue with that reddish brown wood effect over the wooden parts of the rifle, apply a thin line of tan flesh to those upper edges. In this next step, we'll be using some corpse paint to help enhance some of the facial features. Your focus here should be on areas such as the bridge of the nose and the cheekbones. You can also use this paint to pick out the knuckles of the hands as well. For the helmet, canteen and gas mask canisters, we'll be using the slightly lighter and muted green of Army Green. The result will be much more in keeping with the realistic approach than if we had chosen to use a brighter green instead. The final step in painting is to pick out the metal parts of the rifle as well as any clasps or buttons that you want to give a metal sheen to. Carefully apply some small amounts of gunmetal over these areas, taking care not to overspill onto the already completed parts of the model. So once the painting was completed, the only thing left to do was to apply a coat of matte varnish to remove the glossiness caused by the washes, and then to apply a basing scheme, and what we're left with is the finished miniature. As I mentioned before, you'll find either a German Grenadier or a Blitzkrieg German sprue in the January edition of Wargames Illustrated, so keep an eye out for that magazine in your newsagents if you would like to try out these techniques. You can find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video. I also want to say a huge thank you to the guys who support me on Patreon. Your continued patronage really does help me with the costs of producing these videos, and if you'd like to lend me a hand too, I've included my Patreon page in the description below where you can donate to me from as little as $1 a month. And for anyone looking to chat with all things wargaming with others who also enjoy my channel, I set up a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description. So the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching and goodbye.